HOA Karen mocked. My grandpa's uniform didn't know my dad's the police chief. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and nostalgia. The kind of place where time seemed to pause, but tempers didn't. Karen strutted in like she owned the joint, her voice slicing through the hum of small-town chatter. That old man's uniform is a disgrace, looks like it's been through a shredder, she barked, pointing at my grandpa, who sat quietly in the corner booth. His hands folded over a faded green jacket adorned with medals that gleamed despite their age. Grandpa didn't flinch. At 92, he'd seen worse than Karen's venom. His eyes, sharp as ever, stayed fixed on his coffee. But I felt my blood boil. That uniform torn, yes, but earned through years of service in Vietnam was his pride. It was the last thing Grandma ironed before she passed, and he wore it every Memorial Day to honor her and his fallen brothers. Karen, with her perfectly pressed HOA polo and clipboard, had no idea what she was poking at, but I did, and so did the rest of the diner, now staring in stunned silence. I was just a college kid home for the weekend, trying to spend time with Grandpa before heading back to campus. We'd chosen Millie's Diner because it was his favorite pancakes, fluffy enough to make him smile, even on tough days. But Karen, the HOA president who ruled our neighborhood like a dictator, had a knack for ruining things. She'd been hounding Grandpa for weeks about his overgrown lawn, claiming it lowered property values. Never mind that he could barely push a mower anymore, or that I'd been too swamped with finals to help. To her, rules were rules, and feelings were irrelevant. You should be ashamed, parading around in that rag, she continued, her voice louder now, drawing every eye in the place. This is a respectable town, not a thrift store. A few people gasped. Millie, the diner's owner, froze mid-pour behind the counter. My hands tightened around my fork, but Grandpa just sipped his coffee, calm as ever. Let it go. Tommy, he whispered, his voice steady but tired. She's not worth it. I wanted to listen. I really did. But Karen wasn't done. She stepped closer, her heels clicking on the linoleum, and pointed at the medals pinned to his chest. Those are probably fake anyway. Bet you bought them at a flea market. That's when I stood up, chair scraping against the floor. The diner went dead silent. You don't know what you're talking about, I said, my voice low but shaking. That's my grandfather. He's a veteran. Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes. Veteran, sure. Looks more like a homeless guy playing dress-up. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some shook their heads. Others looked ready to jump in. I could feel the tension building, like a storm about to break. Grandpa reached for my arm, but I was already too far gone. You're out of line, I said, stepping toward her. Apologize now. She laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that made my skin crawl. Apologize to him for what I'm just stating facts. This neighborhood has standards, and he's dragging it down. That's when Millie stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. Karen, you're causing a scene. Maybe you should leave. But Karen wasn't one to back down. She'd built her little empire on complaints and fines, and she wasn't about to let a diner full of nobodies tell her what to do. I'm not going anywhere, she snapped. This is a public place, and I have every right to speak my mind. Maybe you should teach your customers some respect. Millie. That's when the twist came. Quiet but seismic. A man in the back booth, who'd been sitting unnoticed with a newspaper, stood up. He was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with a face that carried the weight of authority. Nobody had paid him much attention until now. Karen, he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. You might want to rethink that tone. Every head turned. Karen's smirk faltered, but she recovered quickly. And who are you to tell me what to do, she demanded, hands on her hips. The man folded his newspaper, set it down, and walked toward her. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. I'm Chief Daniels, he said, his badge glinting as he pulled it from his pocket. And that's my father you're insulting? The diner erupted in whispers. Karen's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Chief Daniels, my dad, had been off duty, grabbing a quick coffee before his shift. He wasn't one for public displays, but you didn't mess with his family. especially not Grandpa. I hadn't even known he was there. But now I saw the resemblance in their eyes, steady, unyielding, and done with nonsense. Karen stammered, "I didn't know, but Dad cut her off." "You didn't need to know who I am to show basic respect," he said, his voice calm but cold. "You think you can walk around humiliating people because you've got a clipboard and a title that stops today?" He turned to Grandpa, softening. "You okay, Pop?" Grandpa nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I've dealt with worse," he said, but his eyes were misty. I could tell it hurt, even if he'd never admit it. The medals on his chest earned in jungles and firefights meant more than Karen could ever understand. And now, her words had turned the whole diner against her. People were filming, muttering about entitled Karens and veteran disrespect. The air crackled with judgment. Karen tried to backpedal. "I was just saying the uniform looks inappropriate. I didn't mean any harm," but the crowd wasn't buying it. A woman in a red sweater stood up, her voice shaking with anger. "My dad was in Vietnam, too." "You don't get to talk like that," another man chimed in. "You're the one lowering property values with that attitude." The room was turning, and Karen was sinking fast. Millie, ever the peacemaker, tried to de-escalate. "Let's all calm down," she said, but her eyes were hard. "Karen, I think it's best you go. Now." Karen grabbed her purse, her face red with embarrassment, but she couldn't resist one last jab. "This isn't over," she hissed, glaring at me and Grandpa. "You'll hear from the HOA about that lawn." That was her mistake. Dad stepped closer, towering over her. "You want to talk about the HOA," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Let's talk about the complaints we've been getting about you. Harassing residents, misusing funds, threatening people with fines for no reason. I've been meaning to have a chat with the board about that." Karen froze. The crowd gasped. I hadn't known about any complaints, but the way Dad said it, I knew he wasn't bluffing. Karen's empire was crumbling, and she knew it. She stormed out, her heels clicking furiously, but not before knocking over a tray of sugar packets in her haste. The diner erupted in applause as the door slammed behind her. Grandpa chuckled, shaking his head. "Some people never learn," he said, taking another sip of his coffee. But it wasn't over. The next day, word spread like wildfire. Someone had posted a video of the confrontation online, and it went viral. By noon, Trudier Diner Karen was trending, with thousands of comments tearing into her. People shared stories of her HOA tyranny, fining a single mom for a cracked mailbox, threatening an elderly couple over a faded porch flag. The backlash was relentless. By evening, the HOA board announced an emergency meeting to review leadership concerns. Karen's reign was unraveling. A week later, the truth hit like a freight train. An audit, prompted by Dad's quiet investigation, revealed Karen had been skimming HOA funds for personal expenses, new patio furniture, a fancy vacation. The board stripped her of her position, and the town filed charges. She was ordered to pay restitution, and her reputation was in tatters. The same neighbors she'd bullied now shunned her, and her house went up for sale within a month. She'd been so busy pointing fingers, she never saw the consequences coming. Grandpa, meanwhile, became a local hero. The diner started a veterans breakfast in his honor, free coffee and pancakes for anyone who'd served. He didn't care much for the attention, but I could tell it warmed his heart. One morning, as we sat in our usual booth, he looked at me and said, "Tommy, life's too short for grudges, but it sure feels good when justice does the talking." I laughed, but I couldn't stop thinking about Karen's downfall. She'd mocked a man who'd given everything for his country, and in the end, her own arrogance buried her. It wasn't just about the uniform, it was about respect, accountability, and the kind of legacy you leave behind. Grandpa's uniform might be frayed, but it stood for something real. Karen's clipboard, just a prop for a power trip that crashed and burned. What do you think? Did Karen get what she deserved? Or should she have been given a chance to make things right? Share your thoughts. I'm curious to hear,